Officer Kim Daho didn't like the rain. The water drops hit his patrol car's windshield as he drove through the bright streets of New Angeles. The city lights turned the raindrops into tiny stars, but Kim wasn't thinking about their beauty. He was thinking about the end of his shift, just 2 hours away. Car 247, respond to a disturbance at Quantum Research Building, 1420 Future Drive. The radio crackled. The voice of the dispatcher broke through the sound of rain. Kim looked at his partner, Officer Park Ji-won. She was new to the force, only 6 months in. Your lucky day, rookie. Finally, something interesting. He turned the car around, heading toward the research district. The Quantum Research Building stood tall against the night sky. Its glass walls reflected the city lights, making it look like a giant crystal. Security lights flashed near the front entrance. As they pulled up, Kim saw a man in a dark suit standing by the door. The man was trying to use the card reader. "Look at that," Kim said, his voice getting harder. "Someone's trying to break in." He got out of the car before Park could say anything. The man in the suit turned toward them. He was tall, well-dressed, and black. His suit looked expensive, and he stood very straight, like someone important. But Kim didn't care about that. He only saw someone who didn't belong here. "Step away from the door," Kim shouted, his hand moving to his gun. "Hands where I can see them." The man slowly raised his hands. His movements were calm and smooth. "Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding." "I am." "Shut up," Kim cut him off. "Park, cuff him." Park moved forward slowly. She noticed something different about this man. His eyes were deep and calm, like someone who knew much more than he was saying. He didn't look scared or angry. He just looked patient. "Officers," the man tried again. "My name is Do-young. I have authorization to." Kim stepped closer, his face getting red. "I said shut up. You can explain at the station." As Park put the handcuffs on, she noticed they felt warm, almost like they were alive. Do-young didn't resist. He just looked at her with those strange, knowing eyes. "Check his pockets," Kim ordered. Park found a wallet and a phone. The phone was like nothing she had ever seen. It was thin as paper but felt heavy. When she touched it, it made her fingers tingle. "Sir," Park said quietly, "can you tell me why you're here?" "Enough talking." Kim grabbed Do-young's arm roughly. "He's breaking and entering. That's all we need to know." But Park wasn't so sure. The security guard who called it in was nowhere to be seen. The card reader hadn't been damaged. And this man, something about him made her wonder if they were making a big mistake. They put Do-young in the back of their car. The rain had stopped, but the air felt different now. Park looked up and saw the clouds moving in strange patterns. When she got in the car, all the electronics flickered for a second. "Did you see that?" she asked Kim. "Just a power surge. Common around these science buildings." Kim started driving toward the station. "First good arrest of the week. About time we caught someone actually doing something wrong." In the back seat, Do-young sat quietly. Park watched him in the mirror. He wasn't looking around nervously like most people they arrested. Instead, he seemed to be studying them. His eyes moved between her and Kim, like he was taking notes in his head. The drive to the station was strange. Every traffic light turned green as they approached. Their radio kept picking up odd sounds, like music from very far away. Park felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At the station, Kim pulled Do-young out of the car roughly. "Let's go, buddy. Time to explain what you were doing." "Officer Kim," Do-young said softly, "you should be more careful with your strength. The council doesn't look kindly on unnecessary force." Kim laughed. "The council? City council? They don't tell me how to do my job." Do-young smiled slightly. "Not that council, Officer Kim." Inside the station, the lights buzzed and flickered. Computers turned off and on by themselves. Officer Park felt goosebumps on her arms. Something was definitely not normal about this arrest. Detective Lee Hyun-woo met them at the booking desk. He was the best detective in the precinct, known for solving the hardest cases. As soon as he saw Do-young, his face changed. "Officers," Lee said carefully, "where exactly did you find this man?" "Breaking into the quantum research building," Kim said proudly. "Caught him red-handed." Lee looked at Do-young's ID and frowned. He typed something into his computer, then typed it again. The computer screen went blue, then black, then showed strange symbols before returning to normal. "Officer Kim," Lee said slowly, "I need you to listen carefully. This man is going to jail," Kim interrupted. "Open and shut case." Do-young spoke then, his voice making everyone in the room stop moving. "Detective Lee, you seem to be a reasonable person. Perhaps we could discuss this situation in a more appropriate setting." Lee nodded quickly. "Yes, I think that would be best. Officer Park, please come with us. Officer Kim, stay here and start your report." Kim started to protest, but Lee gave him a look that stopped him. As they walked away, Park noticed that Do-young's handcuffs had somehow come off, though she was sure she had locked them properly. They went to an interview room, but Detective Lee didn't turn on the usual recording equipment. He closed the door and turned to Do-young with a look of respect and worry on his face. "Sir," Lee said quietly, "I don't know exactly who you are, but your credentials, I've never seen anything like them. They seem to be both real and impossible at the same time." Do-young sat down at the table. "An interesting observation, Detective. Your system is not designed to process my identification. That's why your computers are having trouble. But soon, very soon, everything will be explained." Park stood by the door, trying to understand what was happening. The man they had arrested didn't seem arrested anymore. Instead, he seemed to be in charge of the situation. "Officer Park," Do-young said kindly, "you showed good instincts tonight. You sensed that things were not what they appeared to be. That kind of awareness will serve you well in the times ahead." Park felt proud and scared at the same time. "Sir, what exactly is going on?" "For now," Do-young said, "let's just say that Officer Kim's actions tonight will have consequences far beyond what he imagines. But first, we must follow your Earth's legal procedures. I believe I am entitled to a court appearance." Detective Lee nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. I'll arrange everything immediately." As they left the interview room, Park noticed that all the lights in the station were pulsing slightly, like they were breathing. Outside, the rain had started again, but each drop seemed to glow with a faint light. Something big was about to happen. Park could feel it in her bones, and somehow she knew that this night would change everything. Not just for her and Kim, but for everyone. Detective Lee Hyun-woo sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. For the 5th time that night, he tried to run Do-young's fingerprints through the system. For the 5th time, his computer showed strange patterns before going dark. Each time it came back on, the screen showed the same message. "Data classification exceeds current authorization parameters." The detective rubbed his tired eyes. In 15 years of police work, he had never seen anything like this. He looked through the glass wall of his office at Do-young, who sat calmly in the waiting area. The man hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't made any phone calls. He just sat there, watching everyone with those deep, knowing eyes. A knock on his office door made Lee jump. Choi Mi-rae, the station's best cyber specialist, walked in with Do-young's phone in her hand. Her face was pale. "Detective," she said, her voice shaking a little. "You need to see this." Mi-rae placed the phone on his desk. It was unlike any phone Lee had ever seen. The surface looked like black glass, but it felt warm to the touch. There were no buttons, no camera lenses, nothing that made it look like a normal phone. "I tried to analyze it," Mi-rae explained. "When I connected it to our system, it started accessing files by itself. But that's not the strange part." She took a deep breath. It was accessing files that don't exist yet. What do you mean, don't exist yet? The timestamps on the files it was reading. They're from next week, next month, even next year. Mayre's hands were trembling. That's impossible. But I checked everything 3 times. This device, whatever it is, it's not just advanced. It's beyond anything we have. Lee looked out at Du Young again. The man smiled and gave a small wave, as if he could hear their conversation. Just then, Officer Park Ji-won rushed into the office. "Detective Lee, you need to see the security footage from the research building." They gathered around Lee's computer as Park played the video. It showed Du Young approaching the building's entrance. But something was wrong with the footage. Every few seconds, Du Young seemed to be in 2 places at once. The timestamp kept jumping forward and backward. "The security company says their system is working perfectly," Park said. "They think whatever's wrong with the video is because of him." Mayre pointed at the screen. "Look at the card reader when he touches it. The light patterns are all wrong. It's like the machine is trying to read something it doesn't understand." Lee stood up. "Okay, let's think about this carefully. We have a man whose fingerprints crash our system, whose phone can access future files, and who makes security cameras malfunction. Either we're dealing with the most sophisticated hacker in history, or he's something else entirely," Mayre finished quietly. Officer Kim Da-ho burst into the office, his face red with anger. Why isn't he in a cell? He was breaking and entering. "This is a simple case." "Officer Kim," Lee said firmly, "nothing about this case is simple. Do you know what happened to the handcuffs you put on him?" Kim blinked in confusion. "They're on him, where we left them." "No," Park said. "They disappeared. We found them in the patrol car. But they're different now." She pulled the handcuffs from her pocket. The metal had changed color, turning a deep blue that seemed to shift in the light. When Lee touched them, they felt like silk instead of metal. Kim shook his head. "This is crazy. He's playing mind games with us. I'm going to talk to him myself." Before anyone could stop him, Kim stormed out of the office. He walked up to Du Young, pointing his finger angrily. "Listen here, whatever game you're playing." Du Young spoke softly, but his words filled the whole room. "Officer Kim, your anger betrays you. It shows everyone the truth you try to hide, that you're afraid of what you don't understand." The lights in the station dimmed. The air felt heavy, like before a storm. Every computer screen showed the same strange symbols that had appeared earlier. "I am not afraid of you," Kim said, but his voice shook. "No." Du Young stood up slowly. Though he wasn't much taller than Kim, he suddenly seemed to fill the whole space. "Then why did you reach for your weapon when you first saw me? Why did you refuse to listen when I tried to explain? Why do you insist on seeing me as a threat when I have shown no aggression?" Detective Lee stepped between them. "That's enough. Officer Kim, return to your desk. Now." As Kim walked away, his face burning with shame, Mayre gasped. Her tablet was displaying a 3D image of Du Young, but it showed something impossible. The image kept shifting between the man they saw and something else, a form of pure light and geometry that hurt their eyes to look at. "What are you?" Mayre whispered. Du Young turned to her with a gentle smile. "Someone who has been watching and waiting. Your world has reached a crucial point in its development. The quantum research being done in that building. It's more important than you know. Tonight's events will determine much about humanity's future." Park stepped forward. "The quantum research building. You weren't breaking in, were you? You were checking on it. Very good, Officer Park. Your insight serves you well." Du Young looked at each of them in turn. "But now we must continue with your legal process. I believe the prosecutor will be arriving soon." As if on cue, Han Jae-yun, the district prosecutor, walked into the station. She carried herself with her usual confidence, but stopped short when she saw Du Young. Something about him made her usual sharp words die in her throat. "I'm here about the break-in at the research facility," she said. "Ah, Prosecutor Han, Du Young said warmly. Right on time. Shall we discuss the charges you're planning to file? I find your Earth's legal system fascinating. It will be interesting to see how it handles unusual circumstances. Han looked at Detective Lee, who shrugged helplessly. The prosecutor had handled thousands of cases, but something told her this one would be different. The way Du Young talked about their legal system, like it was a curious experiment. We'll need to conduct a formal interview, Han said, trying to sound professional. Of course. Du Young smiled. But first, you might want to look at the security footage. Though I must warn you, human recording devices have trouble capturing certain frequencies of reality. As they walked to the interview room, every electronic device in the station began to pulse with a soft blue light. The air hummed with energy. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds above the station swirled in perfect circles. Detective Lee watched Du Young talking quietly with the prosecutor. He had a feeling that tomorrow's court appearance would be like nothing any of them had ever seen. Whatever Du Young really was, he was about to change their world forever. In the corner of the station, Officer Kim sat at his desk, his head in his hands. His angry certainty had been replaced by a growing fear. Not of Du Young, but of what his own actions might have started. He remembered Du Young's words about consequences, and for the first time in his career, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The courtroom was packed. News of the strange events at the police station had spread quickly. Judge Yang Hee-soo looked down from her bench at the unusual scene before her. The prosecutor, Han Jae-yun, kept checking her notes nervously. Officer Kim sat with his head down, while Officer Park watched everything with wide eyes. Detective Lee and cyber specialist Choi Mi-rae sat together, their faces showing both worry and excitement. In the middle of it all sat Du Young, calm as ever in his perfect black suit. He had refused a lawyer, saying he would represent himself. The morning sun through the windows seemed to shine especially bright around him. Court is now in session, Judge Yang announced. Case number 247B, City of New Angeles versus Du Young, on charges of trespassing and attempted breach of secure facilities. The prosecutor stood up, smoothing her jacket. Your Honor, last night, the defendant was caught attempting to enter the Quantum Research Building without authorization. When confronted by Officers Kim and Park, he... Objection, Your Honor, Du Young said softly. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room completely. The prosecutor is making assumptions about authorization that she cannot prove. Judge Yang raised an eyebrow. Would you care to explain? I will, Your Honor. But first, let the prosecution present their full case. It's important that everything is properly recorded. For the archives, you understand. Something about the way he said archives made everyone in the room shiver. Judge Yang nodded slowly. Continue, Prosecutor Han. Han took a deep breath and started again. She talked about the security footage, though she had to admit it was strangely distorted. She mentioned Du Young's impossible phone and the mysterious changes to the handcuffs. With each piece of evidence, her voice grew less certain. And what about the defendant's identification? Judge Yang asked. Han looked uncomfortable. We were unable to process his credentials, Your Honor. Every system we tried either crashed or showed impossible results. I see. Judge Yang turned to Du Young. Would you like to present your defense? Du Young stood up gracefully. The air in the courtroom seemed to change, becoming thicker, more charged with energy. The lights flickered softly. Your Honor, he began, I would like to start by addressing Officer Kim's actions during my arrest. He turned to look at Kim, who couldn't meet his eyes. Officer Kim made judgments based on my appearance. He saw the color of my skin and made assumptions. This is not unusual in your society, but it is disappointing. The room was completely silent. Even the usual sounds of papers shuffling and people moving had stopped. However, Du Young continued, this incident has provided a perfect opportunity. You see, I chose this appearance very carefully when I designed this avatar. I wanted to experience firsthand how your society treats those it sees as different. Avatar. Judge Yang leaned forward. What do you mean? Do Young smiled. The windows began to vibrate gently, and everyone's phones turned on by themselves, showing strange, swirling patterns. Your Honor, members of the court, citizens of Earth. Du Young's voice had changed. It still sounded human, but now it carried echoes of something else, something vast and ancient. I am the appointed overseer of the Galactic Council's Earth Division. I am here because your species has reached a crucial moment in its development. The air around Du Young began to shimmer. His form seemed to blur at the edges, like a television picture losing focus. The quantum research being conducted in this city has attracted the Council's attention. You are very close to discovering principles that will change your civilization forever. But before we allow that to happen, we needed to test you. Not your scientific knowledge. We already know you are capable in that area. No, we needed to test your hearts, your character, your capacity for justice. Judge Yang gripped her desk tightly. Are you saying you're not human? This form is a biological interface unit designed to let me interact with your world safely. Du Young gestured at his body. My true form would be difficult for human minds to process. As if to demonstrate, the air around him rippled, and for just a second, everyone saw something else standing there, a being of light and geometry, with dimensions that shouldn't be possible. Several people cried out, and Officer Kim fell back in his chair. The Galactic Council oversees the development of thousands of species, Du Young explained, his form returning to normal. When a civilization reaches the point of quantum awakening, as you call it, we must determine if they are ready for the responsibilities that come with such power. He turned to face the whole courtroom. Tonight's events have been very educational. Officer Park showed intuition and fairness. Detective Lee and Ms. Choi demonstrated curiosity and careful analysis. Prosecutor Han, despite her uncertainty, tried to follow proper procedures. His eyes fell on Officer Kim, who was shaking. And Officer Kim, well, he showed us that humanity still has much to learn. But that's not unexpected. Every species struggles with prejudice. The question is, are you willing to grow beyond it? Judge Yang found her voice. What? What happens now? Now, Your Honor, I formally request that all charges be dismissed. Then I will begin my true work, helping humanity prepare for its introduction to the wider galactic community. The judge looked down at her papers, then at the incredible being standing in her courtroom. I think that would be appropriate. Case dismissed. Du Young bowed slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you all for participating in this evaluation. The Council will be very interested in my report. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters who had been live streaming the proceedings were shouting into their phones. Police officers were calling their superiors. Judge Yang was trying to maintain order, but her voice could barely be heard over the noise. In the middle of it all, Du Young walked over to Officer Kim, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Officer Kim, Du Young said gently, your actions yesterday were unfortunate, but they have served a greater purpose. Sometimes the best lessons come from our mistakes. The Council will be watching to see how you learn from this experience. He turned to Officer Park, who was standing straighter than ever. Officer Park, your instincts serve you well. People like you give us hope for humanity's future. The windows of the courtroom suddenly filled with strange, beautiful lights. Outside, the sky had turned a deep purple, and impossible shapes moved through the clouds. Let this day mark the beginning, Du Young announced to the room. Humanity is about to join a much larger community. How you are received will depend greatly on how you learn from moments like this one. The universe is vast, filled with beings of every possible shape, size, and color. In such a cosmos, prejudice is not just morally wrong. It is mathematically impossible. As the courtroom tried to absorb these world-changing revelations, Du Young stood in the center, his form flickering between human and something gloriously other. The simple arrest of a black man had turned into humanity's first step into a universe of wonders and possibilities, and nothing would ever be the same. 1 month after the courtroom revelation, New Angeles had changed in ways nobody could have imagined. The old quantum research building now had a new name, the Earth Council Diplomatic Center. Its glass walls shimmered with strange lights, and visitors reported hearing beautiful music coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Detective Lee Hyun-woo stood in his office, looking out at the city. The morning sun caught the new buildings that had appeared overnight, perfect spheres of crystal and light that housed the first alien diplomats. Regular people walked the streets below, going about their daily lives, but nothing was really regular anymore. His computer made a soft chiming sound. The screen showed symbols he was slowly learning to read, the basic writing system of the Galactic Council. A message from Do Young appeared. "Please join me at the center. Bring Officer Park." Lee smiled. He didn't need to call Park. She would already know. The council had discovered she had a natural talent for their technology. They called it quantum intuition, and they had begun training her to use it. When Lee reached the center, Park was waiting outside. She wore her police uniform, but now it had a small silver pin on the collar, the mark of a council liaison officer. "Good morning, Detective," she said brightly, ready to see what they've done with the place. Inside, the building had become something out of a dream. The walls seemed to breathe. Lights followed their movements like curious animals. In the main hall, beings from 100 worlds talked, floated or glided around. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Lee's eyes couldn't focus on them properly. Do Young stood in the center of it all. He still wore his human form most of the time, but now it had a slight glow around the edges. When he saw them, he smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We have something important to discuss." He led them to a room that hadn't been there yesterday. The walls showed moving pictures of stars and galaxies. "The council has reviewed my report about the arrest incident," Do Young explained. They were very interested in how different humans reacted to the situation. Officer Park's intuition, Detective Lee's careful investigation, Ms. Choi's technical skills. These things showed humanity's potential. He paused, his form flickering slightly. But they were also concerned about Officer Kim's actions. It raised questions about humanity's readiness for advanced technology. Park spoke up. "How is Officer Kim doing in the rehabilitation program?" Do Young's smile grew wider. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. His progress has surprised us." After the shock wore off, he asked to join the council's cultural education program. He's been working hard to understand his prejudices and overcome them. Lee nodded. He had seen Kim recently. The angry, aggressive officer was gone. In his place was a quieter, more thoughtful man who asked a lot of questions and actually listened to the answers. "The council has decided," Do Young continued, "to use our experience here as a teaching model for other worlds. Sometimes the best way to overcome prejudice is to show how small it looks against the vastness of the universe." He waved his hand, and the room filled with holograms of different beings. Some looked like living crystals, others like clouds of light, and some had shapes that made Lee's head hurt. "These are just a few of the species humanity will meet in the coming years," Do Young explained. "Each one has its own way of thinking, its own kind of beauty. The Council believes that exposure to this diversity will help humanity grow beyond its old divisions." Park touched one of the holograms gently. It changed color and made a sound like singing. "When will the public training centers open?" she asked. "Next week," Do Young answered. "We're starting with 20 centers around the world. Humans will learn about galactic culture, basic temporal physics, and quantum communication. But most importantly, they'll learn about each other." He turned to Lee. "Detective, we'd like you to help coordinate the police training program. Your experience with the arrest incident makes you perfect for teaching others how to handle unusual situations." Lee laughed. "You mean like arresting someone who turns out to be an alien diplomat?" "Exactly." Do Young's eyes twinkled. Though hopefully that won't happen too often now that we're officially here. Through the window, they could see the city changing. Old buildings were being upgraded with new technology. Parks now had trees that glowed softly at night. Children played with small floating devices that taught them about science and history from across the galaxy. "There's one more thing," Du Young said. Officer Kim asked to make a public statement. The council approved his request. It will be broadcast worldwide tomorrow. The next day, billions of people watched as Kim stood in front of the Earth Council Diplomatic Center. His hand shook slightly, but his voice was clear and strong. "1 month ago, I made a terrible mistake," he began. "I let my prejudice blind me. I treated someone badly because of how they looked. I thought I was protecting my city, but really, I was showing its worst side to the whole galaxy." He took a deep breath. "But I learned something important. In a universe full of incredible beings, judging anyone by their appearance isn't just wrong. It's foolish. The Council could have punished humanity for my actions. Instead, they chose to teach us. Now I want to help teach others." As Kim spoke, the sky above New Angeles filled with lights. Council ships appeared, visible to Earth for the first time. They were beautiful and impossible, like cities made of stars. Do Young stood next to Park and Lee, watching Kim's speech. "Your world is changing faster than we expected," he said. "Humans are very good at adapting when they want to." Park smiled. "We just needed a little push. Sometimes it takes seeing yourself through alien eyes to understand what needs to change." In the months that followed, Earth transformed. The Council introduced new technologies slowly, making sure humans were ready for each step. Crime rates fell as poverty and scarcity became things of the past. Old hatreds began to fade as people realized how much bigger the universe was than their old prejudices. 1 year after the arrest, Officer Kim graduated from the Council's Advanced Cultural Training Program. He became a teacher, helping other police officers understand their biases and overcome them. The handcuffs he had used to arrest Du Young were put in a museum, transformed by alien technology into a beautiful artwork that showed 2 different forms of life learning to understand each other. Detective Lee wrote a book about that night, titled The Arrest That Changed Everything. It became required reading in schools around the world. Choi Mi-rae helped develop new communication systems that let humans talk to beings made of light or living mathematics. And Officer Park, she became Earth's first quantum intuition instructor, teaching others how to sense the strange and wonderful patterns that connected all living things across the galaxy. Do Young remained on Earth, watching humanity take its first steps into a larger universe. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand on top of the diplomatic center and look out at the city. He would remember that rainy night when 2 police officers found him at a door, and he would smile, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for humanity all along. It just needed to make sure we were ready to be better than we had been. And in the end, a simple arrest had opened the door to the stars.